Here was good, gang. It is day 8 now with Genesis chapter 25 and chapter 26. Let's get into it. Now we're going to be talking about Abraham's viejito self finally passing away. Not like he was overstaying his welcome, but rather the fact that he was pretty old when he passed. And in fact, with his old self, he married another wife and had more sons. And it's not really explicit as to when he married again. It could be before Sarah, or it could even be after she died. Doesn't really explain that in the text. Nonetheless, we know that Abraham loved all his sons, and he gave them all gifts while also sending them away from Isaac because he truly is the promised son. He just wanted to make sure that Isaac was separated from the rest of the sons that he had. And Abraham lived a long and fruitful life. At the ripe old age of 175, he passed away. And it's not explicitly stated, but he lasted a good 15 years after his grandsons were born, so he was actually able to see them grow. And we see Isaac and Ishmael come together as brothers, going to bury their father Abraham in the same cave that he bought for his wife Sarah. And we see that God blesses Isaac after the passing of Abraham in order to keep the same covenant and lineage going as Abraham did. And we see here that Ishmael ends up having 12 sons. Not unlike Jacob, who we'll see later on end up having 12 sons as well. And those are the 12 tribes of Israel. And we see that God's promise of blessing over Ishmael is fulfilled, which is found in Genesis chapter 17, verse 20. We see Ishmael's sons move to Havilah and east of Egypt, which is what we now know as Arabic country. And so now we move on to the beginnings of Esau and Jacob. Now we know that Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, and then eventually they wanted to have kids. And unfortunately, like her mother-in-law, Sarah, Rebekah was also infertile. And so Isaac prayed for his wife to eventually gain fertility, and God granted his prayer. And it seems like it was answered a lot faster than Abraham and Sarah, but I believe it was because God was testing Abraham and Sarah to see if their faithfulness would keep them in covenant with him. And we see that it did, which is probably why God answered the prayer a lot faster for Isaac and Rebekah. And then she eventually had twins. So God doubled the blessing for them. And Rebekah inquired of the Lord about why her twins were fighting in the womb. And then God told her that there was two nations in her belly, that both of them were rivals from the very womb, that one nation will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. We see that Esau is named after the Hebrew word for hair, and his brother Jacob is named after the Hebrew word for heel or deceiver, which both of these names actually claim the characteristics that they'll have later on in life. A bunch of hair that Esau ends up having shows that he's a wild man. He's very outgoing, very outdoorsy, and he really isn't like an untamed beast. Whereas Jacob is more conniving, clever, and deceiving. He's laying in wait for things to happen, and he knows how to make things happen, but not in the way God would have wanted him to. So Isaac was 60 when these boys were born, which is why Abraham was 160 in order to see his grandsons grow. We see Esau ended up being a skillful hunter and an outdoorsman, which shows his animalistic spirit, very unruly. And the same with Jacob, he ended up being more quiet in a temperament and more of a homebody. This is where we see favoritism between Isaac and Rebekah. Isaac favored Esau because he hunted and loved his meals, and Rebekah loved Jacob unconditionally and without wavering. Isaac's love for Esau was conditioned on his performance, whereas Rebekah was just constant and unconditional for Jacob. And here's a story in how Jacob ends up showing his character as well as Esau. Esau ends up coming back from a hunt where he's very tired and very hungry, and Jacob is actually laying in wait for Esau to come back because he knows how he gets. And he has this bowl of lentils, of pretty much soup, red beans, that were just sitting there as he was cooking it, and Esau went wild. He's like, yo, let me get those bowl of beans. And then Jacob was like, nah, hold up. Make sure to give me your birthright first as the firstborn. And Esau was like, whatever, man. I'm freaking hungry. It doesn't matter what this birthright has to give. All I care about is this food right now. And so Esau ended up giving up his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob ended up giving him the bowl of lentils for that. So it's obviously an unfair trade, but it also showed Esau's contempt and carelessness for his birthright. And we will see later on that Jacob's deception will teach him a lesson in a bad and a good way. And here comes chapter 26. Isaac deceives Abimelech. Now, I know what you're thinking. The same guy? No. So there's a thing where in the Old Testament, Abimelech is used as a name or a title for a dynasty. Because at the time that Isaac ends up deceiving this king Abimelech, he was about 90 years away from the time Abraham, his father, deceives Abimelech. So it can't be the same guy. Nevertheless, like father, like son, Abraham and Isaac are both deceivers, and you could see why Jacob ends up being that way. Of course, Isaac is still blessed and prospering because the promise that is fulfilled through Abraham is going through Isaac now, and that's why God ends up prospering Isaac regardless of his failures in his faith. And it seems like this is a reoccurring topic of famines and having to move away, because we'll also see it later on with Jacob too. God ends up confirming the covenant and the promises of Abraham to Isaac because of Abraham's obedience. But he also tells Isaac to be obedient to him by telling him not to go to Egypt, to stay in Gerar, and that if he does that, he will give all these lands to him and his family. And we see the story where Isaac, just like his father Abraham, ends up fearing the Philistines in that land and says, they'll kill me for my wife because she's just way too beautiful. So I'll just go ahead and tell them that she's my sister. For time's sake, I'm going to call King Abimelech King for short. So King saw Isaac caressing Rebekah at this point in time from his window and said, oh, nah, this is definitely his wife. He wasn't playing that, and he definitely called out Isaac for it. We see that Isaac was honest, and therefore, and then on, same stuff, just like Abraham. And then, of course, after this fact, Isaac ends up getting to the bag and just planting and growing and being able to be fruitful in everything he's doing, and even getting hundredfolds because God is blessing him. And King Abimelech's people just are not with it, getting all jealous and feeling some type of way because he's getting blessed. Folks never want to see you win. Jealousy was so bad, it ended up becoming a commandment, as we see in Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. And so the Philistines' jealousy of Isaac made them fill Abraham's wells with dirt. And even the king was tired of it. He said, yo, you're too powerful, bro. You got to go somewhere. And so Isaac ended up moving to the Gerar Valley. He reopened his father's old wells and restored their names as well. And this is where he gets even worse, because he has to even argue now with the people and the shepherds of that land, as well as he's building his own wells. So 2 out of 3 of his new wells end up being taken from him because of 2 different disputes. We see that this is just unfair treatment. 2 of the wells he dug up are being reaped by the benefit of people who didn't even help. That's why God's favor trumps any of man's unfairness. Where we see Isaac's third well had no disputes, and he was able to prosper from there. We also see this is the first time that Isaac acknowledges the Lord's favor in this new land that he's in. And we notice that Isaac isn't complacent either. After God blesses him, he moves to Beersheba from Gerar Valley. He finally builds an altar to the Lord and another well in that area. Just like Abraham did, Isaac worshiped the Lord and settled in his presence. And then here comes the king again. So King Abimelech comes pulling up out of nowhere. And Isaac is like, what's your dusty self doing here? You was tripping when you told me to dip. And the king was all like, my fault, gang. I see that God is doing some good stuff on your side, and I just want to keep the peace. And so they ended up having a covenant feast where they partied, they drank, and then in the morning they had a solemn oath and went their separate ways. This is where the Beersheba comes from, because Isaac ends up calling the well Sheba that he had made, and that means oath. And that's where Beersheba, the name, means well of the oath. Esau ended up marrying these 2 Hittite women, Judith and Basemath, and they caused massive problems for Rebekah and Isaac. But that's all for today. I'm going to end up putting my YouTube link in the description and the Bible study. Y'all have a blessed day. God bless you.